So as I mentioned, we're going to jump over to the P5 editor. And there's a lot here. I'm going to go over the basics. We'll talk about it more as we go. But what this is called is an IDE, which stands for Integrated Development Environment. Let me write this into the code right here. Let's not do that. I'm going to increase the text size a little bit. Okay, so this is an IDE, Integrated Development Environment. And that's just like a fancy way of saying basically all of the crap is in the same place. So I'm going to write my code here. I'm going to see what it looks like over here. And down here, this is going to tell me if I got an error. And this is useful because back in the day, you used to have one program, you wrote all your code there, then you go to another program and compile it. Then you would go to another program and see if it worked, and then you would go to another program and see why it didn't work. And so this is just putting everything in the same place to make things simpler. And it's also on the web, so everything that you do in here is going to be saved in the cloud. And so you don't have to worry about your thumb drive, your desktop folder, any of that crap for this class. Everything is just on this browser, which you can open on any computer, anywhere that you're going to work, whether it's at BMCC or on your home computer, on a lab. You just sign in and it's all going to be there. So the first thing you're going to do is sign up, and that takes 2 seconds. You just need an email. If you have a GitHub account, you can connect it to that if you want to, but you don't have to. You just send an email. I'm going to log in to my account. Um, and once you log in, it's going to remember like your preferences and stuff. That's why the color changed on mine. If you click on this like little wheel here, there's not a lot of preferences, but there's a couple different themes. I use a high contrast for these lectures because it's just obviously high contrast is easier to see. You can increase the text size. You probably don't need to do that, but it's good for this. You can see better. I would leave autosave on. Leave all this stuff on. There's some accessibility options. You can turn the line numbers on or off. You can turn some sounds on. That's pretty much it for those options. Um, Again, over here, this is where we write our code. You can see the file that we're editing is called sketch.js. I'll go over that a little bit more later. And there's a play button to run the code. You can see it doesn't do anything right now because I haven't added anything. But this is the default setup. It creates a canvas. In P5, we think about code as like a sketch or a drawing. So there's a canvas like you were going to do a painting, and then we draw stuff on top of the canvas. So this first thing right here, it says create canvas 400, 400. That makes this square that I'm going to draw on. This line right here is drawing a background, and 220 is basically gray or like light gray. If I change this to light gray, it's basically the same thing. I'll go over the color values more next week. For now, we're just hitting all of the stuff pretty quick. So one of the things I can do is change numbers. If I want to make this wider, I can set this to 600. If I want to make this one taller, I can I can also set it to 600, or I can set it to 500. Whatever number you want to put in there, it'll do. And that's just the number of pixels. So the pixels are like literally the light things on your screen that are shooting light at you, creating color and everything that you see on the screen. So that's the number of pixels wide and the number of pixels tall. And pretty much everything works like that. It's wide and then tall, width and then height, horizontal and then vertical. And we'll talk a little bit about that more next week as well. So if you want to change the basic stuff, you can do that here. So a couple other things, you can stop the program. You don't really need to do that often, but you can if you want to. And then right here, you can name your program. So I'm going to call this P5 intro. I'm going to put a little thing here and say this is MMP 210, spring 2023. That's just for me to keep organized. Obviously, you don't need to do that. I teach this class every semester, so it's going to help me keep organized, but you can just put whatever you want there. And then you can always edit it. And once you save it, so I'm going to save this. Now, whenever I come back to P5, it's going to be in my saved file, so I can bring it back. The way I do that is I just go to Open, just like you would in any other program. So you can see a lot of my older sketches here. You can see I've written a lot of them, going all the way back to 2017. And there's the P5 intro that I just created. There's also a collections area. So I'm going to create a new collection for this semester. So this is MMP 210 Spring 2023. This is just like a folder. Um, you don't have to do this, but I find it nice to organize things. I like to have things organized. I'll probably add a link to this somewhere in the class page on the Open Lab. I can put a link to it in the chat right now. Although I probably want to put it in the channel chat and I'll pin it. That's what I want to do. I'll do that later. Okay. Um, let's go back to the editor. I can duplicate this. So one of the things that's really nice about the P5 editor is if I send you guys a link to this sketch, eventually there'll be a link up here. I don't know why it's not creating a link, but eventually it'll have a link. So I can go to share and click this link here. Um, Actually, what I want to do is click here. It's going to copy it, and then I'll paste that in the voice channel. I haven't put anything in here yet, so you don't want to duplicate it yet. But if you go there later, once I've added some stuff, you can open it. And then if you go to file on your account and you click duplicate, it'll make a copy on your own computer. And then you can just start to add on top of it. So sometimes I'll make a template for you guys to start with, and then you can add your own code in there. So that's really useful. You can share it. There's a full screen version. So if you look at this, it's going to be just that without the code. There's the embedded version to put on a blog if you want to add it into a website, and then there's the edit version, which is what we're looking at right now. Let's see. You can download the files if you want to. You can add it to a collection. There's also examples. So you can look at examples that are made by the people who wrote P5. So if you're like, oh, like, what is this shader as a texture example? This seems cool. And it'll show you, oh, wow, this is cool. And then you can like look at the code and see how they did it. So there's a lot of old examples that you can go through to get ideas or to see how things work. Let me go back. Or I can just go to open. A couple other things in the menu here. Edit. This tidy code function is very, very useful. It's also has a key command, Command Shift F. Um, It'll basically do something like if I do something random, like put this down here, and then I do Command Shift F, it's going to format it for me, although it did in a way that I didn't really like. If there's a lot of coding conventions about how stuff should look, which I'll go over during the semester. Some of them are obvious, you'll see them as I write code, but some of them are weird. But if I do that, it's just going to fix it for me. So that's just Command Shift F. Find and replace, those are just basic. There's a couple things in here that we don't really need. This run and stop are the same as these buttons. And then help, there's keyboard shortcuts. So there's little key commands for certain things that you might want to do. Those are useful. There's also a link to the P5 reference, which we will use a lot. I'll be going over that throughout the semester. And there's also an about page that has some other information. I'm not going to go there right now. Okay, so that's the interface. What I'm going to do now is just show you guys how to make a shape, how to move it around, how to make a different shape, and then how to add colors. And then I'm going to let you guys play around with this for a little bit. Then on Wednesday, I'm going to go through a little bit more detail of creating an artwork, and then I'm going to give you guys more time to spend just kind of going over it on your own. So you'll get a chance to kind of play with stuff, see how stuff works. It's a lot of trial and error. It's not going to make that much sense at first, but a lot of learning how to code is just getting in there, typing stuff out, seeing what happens. It's not going to work all the time, but you'll get a hang of it eventually. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is just add a shape in here. So there's some basic shapes that we can draw. I'm going to go to the reference page, and you can see there's an area for shapes. And what I'm looking at right now is these 2D primitives. We'll get to the other ones later. Excuse me. I don't know how much longer my voice is going to make it, but hopefully we'll be okay. So you can see some of the basic shapes here. Um, there's circle, ellipse is like a circle, but with a different width and height. A line, a point, a quad, that's just 4 lines. Rectangle, square, triangle. There's 2 basic types of shapes that we see here. And I'm going to do a quick drawing. I should have had this open, screen brush. Okay. Okay. So there's 2 basic types of shapes. Some shapes like circles and squares have an origin point, so a point where they start. For the circle, it's in the middle. For the square, it's up here. So it's an origin point. And then they have a width and a height or a size. So a square has the same x or width, so this dimension, and y or height, this dimension. For a circle, it's the same thing, but it goes around the origin instead of going down like this. There's a few other shapes like that. The rectangle, which it starts here and goes this way and goes this way. There's the arc, which is kind of like a pie, so it could like go like this, or it could go like this. Just depends. But it also has like an origin in the middle, and then it has a size that's either the same or different on the width and the height. An ellipse could look like this, where you have a different height and width, um, and or an ellipse could go like this. So that's the first type of shape where you have an origin and a size. The other type of shape is when you have points. So the simplest version of this is just one point. So it's just one point on your canvas, like you just do a dot. A line is 2 points. So there's one point here, and you connect the line. Um, then triangle is 3 points. You have 1, 2, 3 points. 1, 2, 3. Quad, you have 4 points. And then eventually you get into other types of shapes where you have more and more points. So those are the 2 basic types of shapes. The main ones that we'll probably use today are the circle, the square, and the line. The triangle is kind of hard. I might skip it for today. We could give it a shot. But those are the basic types of shapes. So let's start with a square. So when we make a square in code, I just make a new line here. So I went to my like draw function, which is where we draw stuff, and I just hit enter to make a new line. And then I just type in the shape I want, square. And then I put in some parentheses, these 2 little round guys, which are shift and then 9 and 0 on the keyboard. And you can see there's a bunch of these in our code everywhere. And sometimes there's numbers inside of them. Sometimes there's strings inside of them. The numbers represent positions on the canvas and sizes, and the strings represent colors. So for my square, I'm just going to start with something simple. I'm going to put 0, 0, 0. Okay, so 0 is the x, 0 is the y, 0 is the width. And there's nothing there, right? Because I didn't give it any size. So this last number here is the size. So if I give that like 200, now we see a square. Pretty simple. If we look at the reference page for a second, I can actually take a look at what a square looks like, and it'll give me some code examples. So I could just copy and paste this directly into my project. I could just highlight this. I just hit Command C to copy, and I can paste it in here and run my sketch, and there's that square there. So the nice thing about the reference is it has code that you can actually put in your project. And then it has some different examples, and then it shows you how to write it, and it tells you what each parameter means. So the order of the numbers, those numbers are called parameters or arguments, and the order of those numbers determines what number goes with what. So x is the first value, the x coordinate, or where it is horizontally on the canvas. Y is the second value that's up and down vertical, and then S is the size. The rest of the stuff we'll ignore for now. So if I want to move this square over, I just change this number. So if I change it to like 50 and I run it, by the way, I'm hitting Command Enter on my keyboard to rerun instead of hitting the play button. Since I'm writing with my keyboard down here, it just saves me a little bit of time. I don't have to grab my mouse and move it. Okay, so I move the square over. Okay, I want to move it over further. I can do that. I can also use math here. I could say, well, what if I want to do plus 100? It's actually going to add those together for me. So I can put math inside of these arguments. But most of the time, I'll just have something like that. So then for the y, if I want to move down, I can do that on the y. So if I put in 100 here, now the rectangle moves down. Okay, so it's pretty simple. If I want to move up, I can actually go negative. The rectangle is big enough that it's like peeking out, but you can see it's right there. So there we go. So that's a square. So one thing I want to show you, and I'm going to use another shape to show you this, is how the square works. So I'm going to draw a circle, and I'm going to draw it at the exact same place where I drew the square. So x is 100, y is 100. But I'm going to make it really small for a second. I'm going to make the width 5. Do you see that little circle? It's a little too small. Let's make it bigger. So that little circle shows you this circle. So this 100, 100, this 100, 100, that's right here. The circle is right there. It's the middle of the circle. The square is moving this way. That's by default. We can change that. We'll probably do that later. But for now, we just know that the square starts up here. This is the top left part of our square. So we just have to know that when we're making our design. So if I make this circle bigger, what we'll see, now the circle is the same size as the square, but because of the origin point being here, this is the width of the circle. This is that 200, and that's the height of the circle, also 200. The square starts here, and its width goes to here, and its height goes down to here. So this is also 200, this is also 200, but they're not in the same place because they don't have the same origin. So if I wanted to line these guys up for some reason, I would have to move the circle over. I'd have to move it to like, well, let's see, if I add 50, not quite there. If I add 100, there we go. And then I can add on the Y. Oops. Okay, now they're overlapping. So I can use the math to move them over. Once I see that, that's pretty easy. That's just 200. That's 200. Okay, another thing to notice, the circle is on top of the square, right? Because I wrote it after. So in code and in P5, if I draw the square first and then I draw the circle, when it draws the graphics on the screen, it's going to draw the square first and then the circle. That's why the circle is on top. If I move the circle before up here, now it's behind. Okay. So if you draw a circle and you draw a square and you say, where's my circle? It might be covered up by the square. Okay. So let's add a line and yeah, let's add a line and then we'll go to color. So I can draw a line. Remember, a line is 2 points. So if I want to draw a line from here to here, this point is 0, 0. Okay, the top left corner of my canvas is the 0, 0 of the canvas. That's where everything starts. You might, in math, you might be used to seeing 0, 0 is here if you've taken geometry recently or trigonometry. And we can change that. But for now, our 0, 0 is here. And so 600 is this length and 500 is this height. So if I want to draw this line, my first numbers are 0, 0. That's x1, y1. And my second numbers are 600x, 500y. That's x2, y2. Again, if this stuff is confusing, don't worry too much. I'm just throwing everything at you right now. we are going to go back to the shallow end starting next week. So I have my line 0, 0 over to 500, 600. And I got it backwards, so I didn't quite get to here because I did it backwards. So this is 500x, and then 600y is like somewhere down here. So let's fix that. So 600, 500. There's my line. My line is really skinny. That's the default again. If I want to make the line less skinny, I can use something called the stroke weight. If you've ever used Adobe Illustrator and you've made shapes with a stroke and a fill, the stroke weight is like the outline. You're probably familiar with this concept. So if I make the stroke weight something like 10, now I get a nice thicker line. You can notice it also changed the default outline on my shapes because my shapes have a fill and a stroke. The line just has the stroke. So if I want that not to happen, I would have to set the stroke weight to 1 here to the default. And maybe I could make it like 6. Maybe it's, I want something else, depending on what the style. You can also get rid of it completely. You can say no stroke. That's going to make our circle disappear, but we can fix that in a second. Excuse me. Um, so yeah, let's do colors and then I'll be done. So as I mentioned, in Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop or a lot of other art editing programs you may have used before, most most of the time you have a stroke and a fill. The stroke is the outside, the fill is the middle. So if we want to change the stroke and the fill of our shapes, we use those functions. We use that code. So just like I write square or circle, I can go in here and I can write a fill. I can say fill, and for the fill, this is what I was talking about. I need to use a string because I actually can use numbers for colors. We're going to cover that later. But for now, let's just keep it simple. I'm just going to use the name of a color, and this is any color in CSS. So if you don't remember your CSS colors, we can just go to HTML color codes. This is a good website. It has all of the names of the HTML colors. So you probably learned a few of them in MMP 100, but you might not remember them, but here they all are. So you can find all these different colors here. But you can also just kind of guess. You might guess a color exists. Like I'm pretty sure, green exists. So let's see. Now we have green. So the fill is the inside of the shape. Um, let's change. So we have a green square. We still can't see our circle because it's inside the square, but let's change the fill. Let's change the fill to blue. Now we can see the circle inside the square because now they're different colors, so they're not overlapping. A new thing with P5 that's really nice is this actually has a little color picker. So I can choose a different color if I want, and it's just going to fill in this like RGB value for me. So if I want a different green, I can move this around and it'll go to this RGB value. But let's just stick with our HTML or CSS color names. There we go, green and blue. So my line disappeared because I said no stroke up here. So now we can set the stroke. I'm going to say stroke is yellow. And there we go, we have another shape. So I can keep building and start to make a design or an artwork or whatever I want. So I'm going to stop there. So you guys have, we have half an hour left, so you guys can play around on your own. I haven't covered a lot. I know that. I'm going to cover some more on Wednesday, but hopefully this is enough for you guys to get started. You can click on that link that I put in the voice channel earlier and just start playing around with what I've done. You can look at the examples and play around with those, or you can just start from scratch. Just get used to things not working. So one thing that you'll notice, and we'll go over this in a couple weeks, if I screw something up, like if I write fill with a capital F, what I'm going to see is like a red line and nothing here. So that's going to happen a lot when you're first learning to code. But it's usually, if we open up this console, that's what this little console thing down here is for. Excuse me. It's usually going to tell me what I messed up. And we'll go over this a lot more in detail in a couple of weeks, but it's actually telling me it seems that you may have accidentally written fill. You may have meant one of the following. and it gives me some other options. And so what I really meant was fill with a lowercase f. So I just go and fix that, and there we go. So that's going to happen a lot when you first start writing things. If I forget a comma here, it's just not going to run, and it's going to say you're missing an argument. So there's a lot of ways that you can kind of screw up your code, um, but you'll get the hang of it eventually. So just keep that in mind. For now, we're just going to play around with it, and if it doesn't work exactly the way you think it should, that's okay because we're going to keep learning. But for now, I just want you to try some things out and see how it feels. So you can play with the numbers, try different colors, just experiment with stuff and see if you can start to build up a little bit of a composition. On Wednesday, that's when I'll actually go over recreating the artwork. I'll just pick something simple and go over how to do it. And then I'll give you guys more time on Wednesday to work on that project. So I'm going to save this again. The link is the same link. So even though I've made changes, it'll update. So you can click on that link in the voice channel. I'm going to put a link to the color names in here as well, if you want to take a look at that. And I'm going to stop